Welcome to Apple Core, a podcast about the history of Apple. In each episode, we travel back in time to explore the story behind a different Apple product and consider what it tells us about where the company may be heading next. I'm Graham Bauer, a designer, writer, and long-time Apple user.
I'm Charlie Sorrell, a writer, podcaster, and general nerd.
And all-round bon vivant.
Yeah, all-round bon vivant.
Is that a thing?
Yeah. And yeah, I'm a ragamuffin, ne'er-do-well, and wastrel.
That's actually the closest to an accurate description I think you've come up with so far on this show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm D. Griffin Jones, a writer, podcaster, and video producer at Cult of Mac.
Griffin, thank you very much for joining us again. You're becoming a regular guest on the show.
Thank you for continuing to have me on after I blazingly invited myself onto your podcast a few weeks ago.
He did really just shove his way. He gate crashed it.
Our favourite gate crasher. And we're particularly keen for your input today because our topic today is actually Apple Watch. But one of the things we want to do in this episode is, as we look at the history of how Apple Watch has evolved as a product, we want to look at how we could apply the learnings to another product, which I know you're a big fan of, which is Vision Pro.
That's right. I was foolishly convinced into purchasing and keeping it by our Cult of Mac editor-in-chief, Leander Canny, who
He's good at that.
Desperately wanted at least one of us on the team to own one, but didn't want to buy one himself. He convinced me to do it and then pay him back slowly on the Cult of Mac company credit card. And then he ended up keeping his as well. So I've just made poor financial decisions for no particular reason.
Classic Leander.
You know, I do have what I think is the most exciting new piece of technology along the way, so I can't really complain.
Right, yeah, that was the impression I got. I watched one of your videos about how you're using Vision Pro, and the impression I got is you're still feeling it. You know, it's still it's a regular part of your life. Is that right?
I generally find that it's really excellent for my work, specifically writing. There's a few other aspects of my job, like video editing and podcasting, that I can't do inside it, but I try to do as much writing in the Vision Pro as possible. And then on days where I have it on, like usually that's about 3 days a week that I use it for work. Well, you know, I'm already wearing it, so I might as well, you know, watch YouTube videos over lunch in it, or, you know, relax and watch shows in the evening in the Vision Pro as well, because it is, you know, the best screen that I have in the house.
We will have ample more time to talk about Vision Pro, but to just set up this episode for you, if you look at how Apple launched Apple Watch, the product that they initially launched is very different to the Apple Watch that we know today. With Vision Pro, we have an Apple product that's very much in its first iteration. One of the things I want to do in this episode is by looking at the history of how a very different Apple product has iterated to see what lessons we might learn from that, which could give us clues to anticipate where Apple might be heading with Vision Pro next. But before we get into all of that, I want to, as is the custom of our show, present you guys with a couple of teaser questions to get you warmed up. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Right. So question number 1 is, what is retro? And don't say it's Scooby-Doo saying hello.
That's what I was going to say.
That word means nothing to me. I don't know what it is.
RERO, an acronym.
No.
Okay, it's Silicon Valley jargon, and it stands for release early, release often. And that's a development philosophy which definitely applied to Apple's approach to Apple Watch and may well give us a clue to what Apple is doing with Vision Pro as well. And I have another teaser question for you. You're not allowed to look this one up, but can you off the top of your head name the 3 activity rings in Apple Watch?
Activity, calories, and exercise.
I think it's stand, move, and exercise.
You got it there, Griffin. You weren't quickly looking down at your wrist there, were you?
No.
Okay, with that, shall we get into it? You guys ready?
Ready.
Okay, excellent. To start us off, imagine the scene. It's the late 18th century. We're in Paris, and we are joined by one of America's founding fathers who invented one of the first fitness trackers. Now, can you take a guess as to which founding father this would be?
I believe that would have to be Thomas Jefferson.
That's right. Did Paris give it away? Or did you know that he invented a fitness tracker?
I know that he invented a lot of things, like bifocals as well. As the resident guest American on this podcast.
You know all of the American history.
I thought you were going to say Benjamin Franklin, which would have been the other good guess. But yes, it was indeed Thomas Jefferson, Virginian planter, a noted slaver, inventor, architect, and third elected president of the United States.
I think I confused the two of them.
It's a bit hard to say what exactly was the first fitness tracker, but Thomas Jefferson came up with a design for a pedometer whilst he was American ambassador to Paris, and he got a Parisian watchmaker to make this thing for him. It went into his vest pocket, and it had a little bit of string that came out of a hole, and it tied around his thigh, and as he walked along, the string would pull, and each time it pulled the mechanism, then that would count a step. He used this to calculate the distance of his walks around Paris. And he was so enamored with this invention that he actually sent one to James Madison back in America. So there is a long history of Americans coming up with activity trackers. Bringing us a little bit more up to date, it was only really around 2008 with the first Fitbit tracker, the digital activity tracking that we know today started to really kick off. A couple of years later in 2011, do you remember Jawbone came up with a product, the Jawbone Up, which was another early fitness tracker. These activity trackers, they didn't so much look like smartwatches, they were more like bands that you had around your wrist, and they didn't necessarily have a display. You got all the information off them via the app on your iPhone. And Nike got into that band game with the Nike Fuel Band, which launched in 2013.
I was just curious what happened to Jawbone, because that is a name that I have not heard in a long time. They apparently liquidated in 2017.
That's because all of their products were useless. The Jambox, which I had and was excellent, I've still got one of the big Jamboxes, and that was very good. Everybody else makes speakers now.
There's another product at around this time, I think it was 2010, that I think is very pertinent here as a precursor to the Apple Watch, which is the 6th generation iPod Nano. Do you remember that?
Is that the clip-on?
It was one of their weirder iPod Nanos that was small and square, and you could buy a special kind of third-party like band for it to fit it on your wrist as like a proto Apple Watch. And it even came with a selection of watch faces that were very like Steve Jobs designed an Apple Watch in appearance.
The problem with using the 6th generation iPod Nano as a watch was that the clock app didn't stay on. It was an app you had to go into and find. And these bands, so that clipping the Nano onto a wristband was such a popular craze that even in one keynote, Steve Jobs acknowledged that some people were even wearing their Nanos as watches. I do think when Apple then finally got into making its own Apple Watch, they must have had that iPod Nano 6th generation in mind.
You say that the iPod Nano didn't have like an always-on face, that you had to wake up the watch to see it. But, I mean, the Apple Watch didn't do that.
Well, the Apple Watch also had like the gesture to raise to wake.
Yeah,
the iPod Nano did not have that either. You had to like tap the screen or click a button.
That brings us up to around 2013. Apple working on a watch at this time was one of Cupertino's worst kept secrets. These rumors have been going on for a couple of years. Around 2010, the rumors had started that Apple was working on a watch and it was going to be a companion device to the iPhone. But the years went by and nothing came of it. And in an attempt to steal Apple's thunder, what we saw instead was Samsung releasing the first Samsung Galaxy Gear, and Google launching 1 year later Wear OS in March 2014. And at the same time, there was a third-party smartwatch product on the market that was gaining some traction. Do you remember what that was?
The Pebble?
Exactly, yeah. So there was a lot of buzz around this category, and this is probably a very partisan Apple fanboy perspective here. I feel like it's a category that Apple invented, even though it was like the last to enter, because all these other companies were in a rush to get their product to market before Apple, in the full knowledge that Apple was going to release one. I'm not even sure that Samsung would have bothered with the first Galaxy Gear smartwatch if it wasn't for the fact that they knew that they would be stealing Apple's thunder.
The same thing happened with the iPad. When the iPad was expected to come out, Steve Ballmer did keynote at CES that year, and he wouldn't stop going on about the slates, because that's one of the nicknames, one of the names for them.
Oh, yeah.
They were all desperately trying to come up with something because they knew the tablet market was about to take off.
They all tried to beat Apple to the punch, but then Apple's product ended up completely reinventing the market. And so all of their early work was completely useless.
Yeah,
exactly.
This brings us up to September 2014. Apple sent an invite out to the press with the teaser headline, "Wish we could say more." It was a big event because not only did they unveil Apple Watch, they unveiled a new iPhone, the iPhone 6, Apple Pay, and it was that time when Tim Cook forced a U2 album on all of us. Do you remember that?
Ah, yes.
It was at the Flint Center of the Performing Arts, which is a 2,400-seater theatre, and it's the venue where Steve Jobs announced the original Macintosh back in 1984. For this event, because it's a fairly small auditorium, Apple had spent weeks building this massive tented construction on the campus just outside the theatre so they could do one of their encounter areas for the press so that they could try the Apple Watch on for themselves. The amount of design work that went into not just the Apple Watch itself, which is mind-boggling, but the Apple Watch launch is really quite extraordinary. And Johnny Ive was all over all of this. You know, I remember reading an interview where he talked about designing this tent. So they were putting every bit of design muscle they had into controlling every aspect of the media's experience of this product for the first time. Apple Watch is one of the very few occasions where I guess Tim Cook tried to invoke the spirit of the Steve Jobs keynote by using Steve Jobs' trademark phrase, "one more thing." And the one more thing was the Apple Watch. He described it as the next chapter for Apple. To me, it's a very popular product. You know, in the end, it got to be maybe bigger than the iPod even.
Yeah, I mean...
But I'm not sure it's like a next chapter.
What would we say the chapters are? The Mac, the iMac was, I guess, another chapter because that really started off something. The iPhone, the iPad would count. And then there's the iPod. I'd say that's definitely a very important part of Apple history.
Yeah.
But the watch, I mean, it's cool, but I think I would
lump the Apple Watch in symbolically with their other peripheral accessory devices that enhance the iPhone experience, like the AirPods, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe to like a lesser extent, you know, the MagSafe ecosystem of stuff like that. Like, you know, these are cursory devices that are much smarter than you might think. Like, you know, it's a watch, but it's also a full-blown computer. But it's a full-blown computer that's being used for like one specific task in your life in the same way that AirPods are as well.
Yeah, and you can't use it without a phone. Even if you get the standalone version, you still need to, I think you still need a phone to set it up. I think now if you have one for your kids, you can use your own phone and not theirs, but you still need a phone to set the thing up. So
in that sense, it's really interesting if you compare it to something like AirPods, and I could completely see the argument that it's a product of like equivalent importance. But you wouldn't call AirPods the next chapter for Apple.
No. I'd actually say AirPods are probably more important for many people.
If you put it into a context of 2014, when Tim Cook was saying this, and he's still relatively new in the role of CEO, and what he's been hearing endlessly from the press is, can he really fill Steve Jobs' shoes? Right? Does he have the chops to really be the boss of Apple? And even as Apple was doing well financially, where was their next big thing? Now when we think of Steve Jobs and we think of iMac and iPhone and iPad and iPod, but of course there were many years in between those launches during his career as well. But I think there was an impatience and a hunger, particularly in the media, for Apple to do the next big thing. And so I guess maybe Tim Cook was feeling that pressure a bit. And when he described Apple Watch as the next chapter for Apple, maybe he hoped that it was, but I think that he was overselling it, actually, in retrospect, when I look back. And that might be one of the reasons why they made some of the mistakes that I believe that they did make in the original Apple Watch launch, because they tried to make it more than it actually was. It was a really great product, but it maybe wasn't a next chapter for Apple iPhone level great product.
I remember those headlines at the time, and they were kind of bogus because, like, there's never going to be another iPhone. There's never going to be a giant society-wide, everybody needs this new technology product again. I know that sometimes Apple executives can be a little high on their own supply. And also when they're introducing these products, like, they're not just introducing the version that we see, but, you know, Tim Cook also knows what the Apple Watch 3 and 4 is going to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so he might hype up these things a little more than, like, you know, the original Apple Watch wasn't actually that great of a product anyways. But that being said, I feel like that this is the next step of Apple line was maybe written to address those very same journalists who are like, oh, when's the next step of Apple going to come here? Tim Cook's like saying, oh, here it is. This is it.
Yeah, I agree with Griffin on that. The iPhone was the once in an ever product. A majority in the world have got smartphones, and people in all kinds of places have got smartphones. That's not going to happen with Apple Watches, and that's not going to happen with AR glasses or Vision Pros or anything like that. And no matter how cheap they get, because it's just not something that people are going to want.
You won't be surprised to know that I completely disagree with you there.
Fantastic.
The purpose of a smartphone, it's become a necessity because it's the way that you access the internet. And that form factor is currently the way that we do it. But I don't think it's intrinsically the best way to access the internet. One of the things, as I've been researching this show, that really has struck me is the way that for every new Apple product, Steve Jobs used to have a pithy one-liner of what it was for. One of the most famous of those, I guess, is the 1,000 Songs in Your Pocket for the iPod. But watching old keynote events, even if it was something like an app launch or anything, Steve Jobs always had a one-liner for it. One of the only times that he really departed from the one-liner was with the launch of iPhone, where it was classically the three things in one. And that format of three things in one is something that Tim Cook tried to model the Apple Watch launch on. Do you remember what the original three things in one were?
It was a surprise, something to play with, and some chocolate.
And some chocolate. I got that reference.
Was that it?
No, it wasn't. Griffin, do you recall any of the three things?
I remember two out of the three. There was fitness and there was communication, and I don't remember the third.
Yes. Well, the third one is maybe the most obvious, which was a precise, customizable timepiece was the first thing. So the three things were a precise, customizable timepiece, an intimate way to connect and communicate, and a comprehensive health and fitness device. But what happened just there, which I find very telling, Griffin, is the first thing you went to was health and fitness. And it was the last thing that Tim Cook mentioned. And I think it's telling because that is indicative of the pivot that Apple went on. In the original 2014 launch of Apple Watch, fitness was an add-on at the end. It felt a little bit hurried, to be honest. It didn't seem like that they were really serious about doing a fitness watch. To me, reading between the lines of the sort of Kremlinology or Cupertinology of understanding this presentation, I very much got the feel of the wizard operating behind the curtains, which was Johnny Ive. At the point at which they ran the first promo video where they revealed what Apple Watch looked like, the whole of the audience stands up and they're doing a standing ovation. And Tim Cook is just standing there a bit uncomfortably and he gestures to Johnny Ive, who's sitting in the front row. And it's like, this applause is for Johnny Ive. So he doesn't accept it for himself. Steve Jobs would often say, please give a round of applause to everyone in the team that worked on this product. But Tim Cook was saying, well, no, this is Johnny Ive's baby. That is repeated again when queuing up this video of Johnny Ive explaining his thinking. Tim Cook said, there is no one better to tell the story than Johnny. And that was, to me, another kind of reinforcement that Johnny Ive had his fingerprints all over this shiny little precious product.
I think that story about Tim Cook pumping up Johnny Ive for this product launch is interesting in the modern context, because now we know that, retrospectively, Johnny Ive was feeling disillusioned at the company at this time, and Tim Cook really threw Johnny this bone in order to convince him to stay at the company. And so it makes sense that he was like, oh, this is Johnny's product. Everyone applaud for Johnny. Isn't he doing such a good job?
That is a very interesting observation, yeah.
Yeah, I thought something similar because he was famously into watches, right? And we got this gold edition watch. So yeah, but I agree with Griffin. I think this was very much like, okay, Johnny, what do you want to do? Okay, make a watch.
I picked up on some interesting inconsistencies in the keynotes, some contradictory things that are said. For example, different people using different names for the same app. That happened in the presentation. The activity app, as it was called then, was sometimes referred to as the fitness app. And that it went back and forth, even within one presentation. And that was not the only example. There was mention, for example, of a walkie-talkie app, which didn't launch until 2 years later and was obviously nonsense, and no one ever used it, to my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It was terrible. I used it once and talking to another journalist friend of mine, and that was it.
Yeah, but that was actually mentioned in the original launch video, yeah, I just got the vibe from the way in which different people were talking, using different language to talk about the same things. That was unusual for Apple because they normally have their PR story very pinned down. To me, it was indicative of the fact that there were internal wranglings going on. I think, for example, whether or not Apple Watch was a fitness device in itself might have been something that Johnny Ive saw it more as an intimate way to communicate. And there's very much that drama beneath the surface in the keynote. But with that in mind, Charlie, you are so good at your Johnny Ive impression that I'm going to send you another Johnny Ive quote, and I wondered if you could read it for us. So I'll be Tim Cook. There is no one better to tell the story than Johnny. Over to you, Johnny.
That's a really pretty good Tim Cook impersonation. You know, it's driven Apple from the beginning, this compulsion to take incredibly powerful technology and make it accessible, relevant, and ultimately personal. We've designed a range of products so personal you don't put them on your desk or in your pocket. You wear them on your wrist. We conceived, designed, and developed Apple Watch as a completely singular product. You know you can't determine a boundary between the physical object and the software. We're introducing an unparalleled level of technical innovation, combined with a design that connects with the wearer at an intimate level, to both embrace individuality and inspire desires. You see an organisation of apps that, while new, is somehow familiar. Navigation is fluid and vital. We have worked closely with horological experts from around the world to help us understand the cultural and historical significance of timekeeping. And this has profoundly informed our design.
Profoundly.
There, how's that?
Horological experts. Intimate yet fluid and vital.
What confuses me in that quote is that he describes Apple Watch as a completely singular product when they debuted with 3 different models, each in 2 different sizes. And in, 37 different bands and finishes and colors. This is the least singular product they ever released.
To me, it was Liquid Johnny, and I really enjoyed it, and I loved this idea of consulting horological experts.
Liquid Johnny is... I don't know what that sounds like, but it's Liquid Johnny.
It does actually tell us something about Apple's approach, which is different, and I think it's something that we might want to come back to with Vision Pro as well, which is this idea of, if we're designing a watch, then we need to talk to horological experts, which is basically clock experts. When Apple is doing something, they have the inclination, the time, and the budget to really do it, to go back to the basics and rethink it from the ground up. So, for Johnny Ive, he's not just assuming what a watch is. He's consulting professors of horology to get to the essence of watch. I think that is very indicative of Apple's approach. And so one of the funny things here is as maximalist as this language is, and I do think some of it is overly flowery, I think Johnny Ive kind of gets away with it because to some extent it's true. I believe that he probably did consult with horological experts and other people don't do that. And that is one of the things that does differentiate Apple products. So whilst, on the one hand, I'm laughing at it, on the other hand, I do have a kind of respect for it.
I think Liquid Johnny reminds me of the iPhone 5C commercial where you see this blue liquid just pour into nowhere. And then it just becomes the iPhone 5C shape, the unapologetically plastic iPhone 5C. That's one of my favorite commercials.
The next thing that Tim Cook gets into is some spiel, which is exactly the same spiel that he will use 9 years later with the launch of Vision Pro. So this spiel is, he says, it turns out that every breakthrough computing platform needs a breakthrough user interface. What he was saying was that just as the mouse is to the Mac and the click wheel to the iPod and the multi-touch is to the iPhone, the Digital Crown is the next breakthrough UI paradigm for Apple Watch. And that's exactly the same thing that he said about the Vision Pro. But the funny thing is that 9 years later, when he talked about the Vision Pro, he didn't mention the breakthrough UI thing that they introduced for Apple Watch.
Well, lists are better when they're only 3 items long. You can't just keep growing that list with every new product. That would be silly.
One of the things about the Digital Crown, I think there was some good thinking there, but there was also something which was indicative of part of the problem of how they had in their minds framed Apple Watch when they launched it. Because another thing that Tim Cook said was we didn't just take the iPhone user interface, shrink it down, and strap it on your wrist. And ironically, I would say that's kind of exactly what they did with the original Apple Watch. You know, that they had this concept of a home screen that was a matrix of apps, just like the iPhone. And as an app developer, if you used WatchKit to develop an app, you had this list view controller, which showed a hierarchical view of lists with a back button top left, which was exactly like developing an iPhone app. You could pretty much take the UI concept of any iPhone app and shrink it down and put it on an Apple Watch. Now, to be fair, Apple said you shouldn't do that. They said, you know, people are not going to be looking at their wrist for as long as they look at their iPhone. So you should do a more kind of stripped down app. But if you were to just look at the APIs and the frameworks that Apple gave you to develop apps with WatchKit, they absolutely were the equivalent of iPhone apps. Whatever Tim Cook said.
I think he was also saying that in the context of like the touchscreen gestures, like scrolling on a tiny screen isn't as good because your finger is blocking the content you're looking at, and you can't pinch to zoom on a 1.5-inch screen.
Exactly. So the rationale for the Digital Crown started with zooming, which I find very interesting. Right up until this latest update to watchOS, if you looked at the frog spawn home screen of the matrix of apps, if you scroll the Digital Crown, it would zoom in to launch the app that was in the center of your view, which was a very strange interaction mode in the end, but made sense in the original iteration of Apple Watch, because the main thing that Digital Crown did was zoom. They showed a picture when they announced the Apple Watch of two fingers on a tiny little Apple Watch screen and say, you can't do this. But the funny thing is, you don't need to do this, because actually the kind of interactions that you have with Apple Watch really don't require much zooming. They don't require much scrolling either. Originally, Apple's watch apps used to scroll vertically a lot. Then they changed like last year with watchOS 10 so that you would have buttons in the four corners. So the view was no longer supposed to scroll, it was supposed to stay static. And I think this was indicative of the fact that Apple, with watchOS 10, had finally realized that Apple Watch was more of a device rather than a computing platform.
And even when they do have vertical scrolling, you're like not scrolling through a free form list. You're scrolling through different pages. Like, you know, you swipe, you can still do the easy quick swipe up with your finger on the screen, but then it just tabs through these different like pre-made screens. You're not really scrolling at all, which also kind of obsoletes the Digital Crown, because the Digital Crown is a precision scrolling device that, you know, if a lazy swipe up gesture with your finger does, then it's not really as necessary.
You could quite easily take the Digital Crown off the Apple Watch now. You wouldn't lose anything from it. It's just that the Digital Crown seems best on the AirPods Max, where it's just a knob. It's Apple's knob.
It's just a knob. That's the perfect counter to a Johnny Ive breakthrough UI spiel. It's just a knob, Johnny.
There was some interview with Johnny Ive years ago where he said that he's somewhat of a fiddly person. You know, he always likes to have like a little fidget in his hands. And he said that like he's always dreamed of designing an Apple product with a completely superfluous element on it that he could just like play with in his hands or something like that. Like, of course, Johnny, the universe's most famous minimalist, like his dream is to make something unnecessary. And like, I kind of feel like the Digital Crown is that, like that it's a thing that you can just like spin passively on your wrist, like, you know, off camera on a video call or something, inspired by a true story, you know, with your fingers, like on your wrist. You know, it can be kind of like a toy like that.
Johnny's fidget tool.
I think they started with the premise of it was going to have a crown because they wanted it to read as a watch, and particularly because it was going to be square in shape, whereas most watches are circular in shape. They needed to have more of the design cues of a watch so that it would read as a watch. And so I think that they started out with, it's going to have a Digital Crown on it, but we don't need to wind this thing up because it's electronic. So what is the purpose of the Digital Crown? I kind of feel like it was not a solution to a problem, but the other way around. Now, this brings us on to the next thing, which is, what did Johnny Ive think that the Apple Watch was for? And the thing in that text that you read out, Charlie, and throughout the video that he kept going back to, was this rather disturbing use of the word intimate. That he felt that this was the most intimate product that Apple had ever made, and that he wanted to invent intimate new ways of communicating Do you guys remember what his ideas were for intimate new ways of communicating?
Yeah, there was the heartbeat, no? You could send your heartbeat to somebody else.
And you could also draw on the screen and have the drawing appear live on someone else's wrist, how you drew it, which is actually still there in the iPhone, in the Messages app, if you really dig for it.
Yeah, and then the other thing you could do was tap someone on the wrist, which again is a stalker's dream kind of weird thing. And it didn't make any sense. Coming up with drawings that you could draw on your Apple Watch with a stubby little finger was a real challenge. This was not an easy thing to do, but bizarrely, it took up the whole of the side button. Now, when you press the side button, it triggers the control center. And for a long time, it triggered the dock.
Yeah.
The control center, something that they didn't even have in the original Apple Watch OS, bizarrely. There was something called glances. Do you remember glances?
Yeah, this was a separate interface that was a tiny version of your app that could have like a small amount of information. It's basically modern widgets, but more complicated, because it's an entirely different app view that people also need to implement that's available if you swipe down below the watch face. And I think it made it like 2 versions of watchOS until it was completely removed.
To me, that glances aspect really was indicative of, again, that Apple didn't really understand what it was that they had here, because there was no need for glances.
I think that a lot of the lessons that Apple has learned from these early versions of watchOS is that now what we see in modern Apple is they have a lot of these same pieces and elements, but they know that developers have a limited bandwidth and a limited amount of patience for Apple constantly changing things. And so their strategy nowadays is to like reuse as many of these bits of interface and design as possible. Like the complications that you design on the watch, well, those are also the same widgets that you can put on your lock screen of your iPhone. The widgets that you put on your home screen are like the bits of UI that you design for the dynamic island. Well, those can also be reused as widgets on the watch when you scroll below your watch face in that sort of smart stack. Like, and even the tools that they use and even the programming, like they invented a whole new UI paradigm called Swift UI that lets you reuse the same code across all these platforms and combine, compile the same code base into all of these wildly different devices and form factors, and the UI interface conventions will like just work.
That's
most
really
of the way.
Interesting point. Yeah, and I think you're right that some of the miscues in terms of what they put developers through and how developers subsequently abandoned the Apple Watch platform. It's interesting in some senses. When I think about Vision Pro, I think, well, maybe they didn't learn the lessons, but actually what you said there is true. It illustrates in many ways that they did learn the lessons. Force touch, it's another thing. They spent a lot of time in the original launch talking about Force touch. Apple Watch was the first to get this force sensitivity in its display, and it performed a really important function of bringing up a context menu. I think that lasted a couple of years, and then I think by Series 4, Apple scrapped it. And Apple even went further than that. They didn't just scrap it on new watches, they disabled it on all the previous watches with a watchOS update.
No, that was just vindictive.
Another concept that they had that they completely changed was time travel. And this is something from the original launch that Kevin Lynch showed this feature where you would scroll the digital crown on the watch face and it would move forward in time, and all the complications and stuff would move forward in time as well. And that didn't make it into the original watchOS. Apple didn't talk about it for a couple of years, and then they introduced it. One of the use cases for this was if you had an electric Volkswagen, you could see what the battery level of your car was now. And if you used time travel to scroll the digital crown, your watch into the future, you could see what your battery level was going to be like at some point in the future, like if you're charging it. And it's like, well, I kind of see that as sort of, maybe. But the number of...
Or it could just say 3 hours till full.
They love this idea of using the digital crown again on the watch face for time travel, but they couldn't really come up with anything that it was actually useful for, apart from putting the hands of the watch in the wrong place so that you mistake what the time is.
Have you noticed that whenever Apple uses the name Time for any of its products, they have a really weird interface, like Time Machine? You go into that and you have to kind of scroll back through time. I don't know, maybe someone's responsible for maybe there's an intern who's related to Eddie Q or something like this who designs all of this stuff, Eddie Q's cousin.
Well, they called time on this product.
Oh.
There's a gag. Sometimes there's a gag.
You could keep that in.
They called time on time travel a couple of years later. So then the last and least bit was the health and fitness side of things. Tim Cook said, this is a very important area for me and a very important area for Apple, but it clearly wasn't. At this point, the table stakes for a fitness watch was to have onboard GPS. That had been really a standard thing for several years, and Apple Watch did not have GPS. I remember when they announced the fitness side of things, he said, and you can go for a run and it will log your distance using GPS from your iPhone. When they added the from your iPhone, and I was like, oh, okay.
It sounds like a sweet solution.
Because I'm that geek, I used to go for a run with two watches. I would have my Apple Watch and then I'd have a proper running watch for logging my run. Even when Apple Watch Series 2 introduced GPS, it wasn't good. In fact, it was very, very bad. And if you compared it to anyone else's GPS, it was atrocious. And I don't actually think that Apple really addressed those issues fully, although it did get better over the years. But they only really fully addressed that with dual band GPS in the Apple Watch Ultra. The last thing to say about this launch was the price and the way in which they positioned it. The main Apple Watch, the first one they talked about, was the stainless steel Apple Watch, which was priced between $550 and $1,090, depending upon which band that you got. Then they would talk about the aluminum sport watch, Apple Watch Sport, which was $350 to $400. They didn't see that as being the main Apple Watch. It became the main Apple Watch to the point that they just decided, I think within a year, they just started calling that Apple Watch rather than Apple Watch Sport. Then the last bit, the gold thing, not only did Johnny Ive speak to horologists, but he spoke to their metallurgists as well to come up with this entirely new form of 18 karat gold that was twice as hard as standard gold. And they sold this for an eye-watering $10,000. It's just extraordinary to think that they sold that now. I remember at the time, Leander at Cultimatic wrote a real hot take about this in terms of, I think his argument was something along the lines of, Andy Warhol once said that with Coca-Cola, the great thing was that if you have a Coke, it's the same Coke as if I have a Coke, or if the President of the United States has a Coke, everyone has the same Coke. And that was always the way with Apple products too. But now there's this freaking $10,000 gold Apple Watch.
Yeah, everyone has the same Coke, but some of us get to take it with a gold Coke spoon.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
And there was even above that, if you were one of Apple's like favorite celebrities, like I think Beyonce got a special, even more special version of the gold watch that had a special gold link bracelet that wasn't even available for sale.
Yeah, exactly. So they were really going for this exclusivity, and in fact I'm not sure even if they sold the gold Apple Watch edition in the Apple Store. I don't think they did. I think it was only sold in certain very select premium department stores. All those concessions were taken out within a year, which suggests to me that that was a disaster and every bit as preposterous an idea as it seemed to be. I remember even at the time, one of the things people questioned was, when technology gets updated all the time, why would you spend $10,000 on an Apple Watch, which you're only going to need to update next year anyway?
Yeah, I wrote an article about this at the time, exactly that. It's like the Virtu phone, which was just a regular Nokia phone inside. Well, more or less. The whole thing was absolute nonsense. And, you could spend thousands on one of these handsets. And the watch is the same. When did the first Apple Watch get left behind by software updates? The thing is, you spend 10 grand on a watch, you want to be able to use that thing forever and hand it on down to people or sell it or whatever. You don't want it to be useless. You don't want it to be a dead trinket in Griffin's gadget drawer. Although I guess if you have one of those in there, it'd be all right. You could sell it. You could put that on eBay and get a whole lot of iPods in exchange. So yeah, it's the whole thing's nonsense.
Yeah, it was. There was some speculation at the time of maybe Apple will enable some way for you to pop out the innards and update the innards, but keep the case. No, no, that never happened.
The completely unnecessary part of it was that it wasn't just gold plated. Like, it wasn't a stainless steel watch with a layer of gold under it, which would maybe have made it almost reasonable. No, this was solid gold through the entire body, which is such a Johnny Ive move and completely unnecessary.
I bet it was some special kind of alloy.
It was.
Or some special formulation of gold. It was.
And now what they do is they just anodize the steel one to be yellow color, so it looks the same and it doesn't cost $10,000.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a dog that had 4 gold Apple Watches, one for each paw? Do you remember that? And that was doing the rounds on Instagram. So the dog was wearing $40,000 worth of Apple Watch on its paws.
I hate this planet, this world. Humans do not deserve the Earth.
Did he also have a Mac Pro and a Pro Display XDR in his doghouse?
I think he did. Yeah, I think there were actually follow-up stories of how many iPhones he had.
That was for his entry phone.
Originally, Apple Watches shipped with the bands attached to the watch. Johnny Ive was very proud of this because he wanted, when you open the box, to see your watch as a watch. It wouldn't look like a watch if it didn't have its bands attached. But that presented lots of serious logistical complications because rather than actually you pick your watch and you pick your band and they will be put in separate boxes so you could pretty much use any configuration that you want, that wasn't the case with the original Apple Watch.
Yeah, if you had a problem, if you didn't like your watch strap or you bought the wrong size watch strap, you'd have to send the entire parcel back, watch included. And it also meant that if you wanted, my Apple Watch, I have a Milanese loop with it, and I got the first one that had the always on screen. Was that the Series 5? And so that came in separate boxes, and the Apple Store, they go out the back and wrap them up for you. I got it on launch day. But prior to that, if you wanted a different strap, then you'd still get your rubber band with that, and plus, so that would be a complete waste. Another waste of resources. You just have to, throw it in the drawer or throw it away.
You're looking at all of those things, right? Before we compare this with Vision Pro, I want to compare this with the Steve Jobs era. Every product that came out, the Steve Jobs had a really clear, on-the-money understanding of what it was for. But when the Apple Watch came out, they didn't know what Apple Watch was for. They actually thought it was like a new computing platform that people would run apps on. Slightly simplified iPhone apps, but basically iPhone apps that you would run on your watch, and that you would do these bizarre, intimate forms of communication with it. And then as a very secondary thing, you might also use it for health and fitness. I think, that was what they thought, and all of that was wrong. And I don't think that in the Steve Jobs era, Apple would have shipped Apple Watch at that point. I do think they probably would have shipped it, but I think they would have waited longer and released it when they'd refined it to a point at which Steve Jobs was ready to green light it. And I think what we've seen in the Tim Cook era is more of a retro approach. If we could go back to Scooby-Doo saying hello, where we started this. Retro, release early, release often. In that I think what we see with Apple Watch and with Vision Pro is a preference on Tim Cook's part to get the product out sooner and to start getting the learnings. So that the principle of release early, release often, RERO, is exactly that. It's an aspect of the whole agile software development model. If you sit on a project for too long and keep honing it and keep making it more perfect, you might never ship it. And by the time you do release it, the market might have changed. So in terms of, Steve Jobs talked about always skating to where the puck will be rather than where it is. And you absolutely have to do that if you're going to do Steve Jobs' approach, because you're developing some perfect product which you're going to release in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So you need to have that vision to be able to do it. If you don't have the vision, but you think there's something in the territory, whether it's like a wrist-based companion device to an iPhone, or whether it's some kind of spatial platform, I think the Tim Cook approach that we've seen with these two products is something quite different, which is let's get something out there into the market and let's start learning and find out what it's for.
I don't know if you can say that yet, though, about the Vision Pro, because, right now it's release early, release once. No, and it doesn't look like there's anything else coming for a while.
Well, that's true.
Even the software updates are very basic.
Well, that could be that really between the Vision Pro's original launch and Vision OS 2, there was only like a 6-month period rather than a full year.
Sure, but I suppose it feels like the Vision Pro's been out for a lot longer than it is, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. We can't make a direct analogy there because one of the things would be Apple Watch from day one had the potential to be a mass market product because it was affordable to a lot more people. It didn't sell in huge numbers, but it was a grower. And what they did from day one, they weren't so pig-headed as to dig in their heels and say, no, it's about intimate communication and I will not budge. With WatchOS 2, they didn't solve everything, but they were starting to try new things out. And then they changed it again and again. One of the extraordinary things to me about almost every button or gesture on Apple Watch is almost every one of them, what it does has changed more than once during the evolution of the product. I think it's a deliberate strategy. I recognize that Vision Pro is outside the budget of most people today, but I don't even necessarily think that this form factor or anything like it is where Apple sees Vision OS in 10 years' time. But they wanted to get something out there so they can start learning, because when they are ready to ship the affordable version or the glasses or whatever it may be that has more mass market potential, they don't want to be where they were at with WatchOS 1. They want to have gone through a lot of those learnings with an albeit smaller user base so that they hit the ground running when they are ready to go mass market. What do you guys think about Rero versus the Steve Jobs perfectly formed product approach? How do you feel about what Apple is doing here? Do you think they're on the right track? Do you miss the Steve Jobs era?
I think Jobs kind of did that anyway. I mean, his mantra of real artists ship is a similar kind of thing. You got to get it out the door. Otherwise it doesn't, otherwise it's not really a product. And they sped up the releases of OS 10 as it was then to yearly under Jobs. And, the notorious demo for the iPhone where, that was barely viable and he was taking it on stage. And the fact that it made it the entire way through of the keynote was something of a miracle, from the stories we've heard since, and, and how flaky it was. So I think Jobs was really pushed things out as soon as possible as well. So I don't think it was really that different. The yearly iterations of the iPhone has really been it's very strict. There's always a new iPhone every year, always a new iOS.
I think what sets the Vision Pro release apart is that they are maybe more explicitly playing a long game than I think they ever really have before. I think they launched it right now because this is the first time that they've truly created a totally brand new interface and paradigm and app store and way of interacting with apps since the original iPhone. If you go back before that, the last major leap they had was when they moved macOS to be a Unix-based system in macOS 10. Truly new software development platforms are very rare for Apple. The iPad didn't start from zero. The Apple Watch didn't start from zero really, and it kind of bit them in the butt because of that, because they had to ship it, the Apple Watch, when they did. They had to have a third-party developer app store on day one, and it kind of came back to bite them because a year later they had to replace it with something different. The Vision Pro is their first brand new interaction model software platform, so they need to have apps for it, even though it isn't really ready as a product yet. It feels like there are two different parallels that I can draw here. As a computer, it feels like owning a personal computer in the 80s before the internet. In the 80s, everybody knew that computers were going to be a big thing. Personal computers are starting to hit the market and they're starting to be affordable to more people. But then there was the question, there's a great book by Lane Nooney called The Apple II Age that spends a lot of time saying, people didn't know what they were buying computers for. People bought computers and took them home. And then it was well, now what? I can write letters on this, but, I could just write a letter on my typewriter. I can play games on this, but I could also just buy an Atari or a Nintendo. There were a few special things that computers could do that really nothing else could do, like digital spreadsheets. Those were a big killer app, and those justified the existence of computers. But if you don't need to make spreadsheets for your personal life at home, why are you buying an Apple II? Why are you buying a Macintosh? And the Vision Pro kind of feels the same way. Why are you buying a more expensive computer that straps to your face and only gets 2 hours of battery life? Well, the experience of wearing it kind of feels like you're wearing an invisible computer. When I wear the Vision Pro, the thing that it can do that my Mac or my iPhone or an iPad can't do is that I can have the apps floating around in my environment. So instead of carrying around a phone and staring at it and putting in AirPods to watch a video over lunch, well, I can have it on a much bigger screen, a full-size TV floating in my kitchen. That would be ludicrously expensive to do the other way. I can live the dream of watching a movie while laying down in bed without the physical danger of a TV falling on me in my sleep. It has its niche advantages in that way.
I'm not sure that a giant TV is actually cheaper than a Vision Pro, though. I see your point. I agree with you entirely.
That's true. But it also, as an entertainment device, although there isn't a lot of software made for it. There aren't a lot of games for it, which is a big advantage of getting a much cheaper Meta headset. Like as an entertainment device, it kind of feels like owning a television in the mid 1940s. Like on the one hand, I have this form of entertainment that other people don't have. Like I'm the only person probably in a 50-mile radius in Ohio that has a Vision Pro. So I have access to this form of like spatial immersive 3D entertainment in the best way that it is to watch all of these things. But on the other hand, there isn't actually a lot of 3D immersive content to watch. You can get through it in like a few hours, honestly. And then you have to wait a few weeks for Apple to put out another episode of their 3D immersive television on Apple TV Plus. So Apple is definitely playing the long game with this. I think they shipped it at this time at this ludicrous price because they know that in 5 years, it'll be a little more reasonably priced or a little less insanely priced. And they know that in 10 years, they'll be able to hit the gold mine, which is augmented reality glasses. And I think if you project like 15 years, what we might see is that the Vision Pro and the glasses version of the Vision Pro are kind of like an equivalent of what your Apple Watch is to your iPhone or your iPhone is to your Mac. Like we will have these different tiers of devices with different levels of power and different levels of immersion. Like the glasses are a thing that you can wear every day and have like light interactions with and run like a few apps and get notifications on as a less immersive way to still be connected in a way that isn't entirely socially awkward. But the glasses won't be as powerful and they won't be, fully virtual reality as when you put on a headset when you want to like sit down for evening entertainment or do work in that sort of way.
When I was re-watching the launch video, Tim Cook said, "It's not often that we get the chance to design an entirely new category to establish the principle that will influence the design for years to come." And I think he literally meant that. And it's another way of saying, I think what you just said, that he's literally saying years to come, and he's saying category. He's not saying a product, he's saying a category of product and years to come. There are actually two obviously different paths they could go on. One is that they could aim to reduce the price. So there have been rumors of doing a cheaper one with a lower resolution display. But as soon as I heard that, I thought, really? Because at the moment, the display, I know it's state of the art and best it can be, but it's maybe not as good as it needs to be because it doesn't actually replace a 4K display yet. And it would be great if it did, but it doesn't really do that. So there is a case for making that even better.
Yeah.
And keeping the price the same or even higher is a legitimate different way you could go with that product, rather than taking the price down and making it worse.
That rumor has never really made sense to me because I really think that Apple views the Vision Pro as it exists today as the minimum viable VR experience in terms of specs. I would be amazed if they actually ship a version with a explicitly worse display. Now, I have seen a different rumor that says, well, they'll get a cheaper display by making it a little bigger, and then it'll be a little cheaper to manufacture with roughly similar specs. And I think that could be a way that they bring the price down a little bit, but I don't see them worsening the product to bring the price down in any really meaningful way. The ultimate different way they could take it would be, well, you get the best quality pass-through video if you don't need to have pass-through video at all, and if the screens are just transparent, which is what a glasses product would be like. But that would require a pretty significant rethinking of the device because then you need a completely different display technology. And the Vision Pro has like all of its technology between your eyes and the outside world. Like the batteries and the processor and the motherboard are all sitting there in front of your eyes. Facebook's Orion prototype and the ridiculous Snapchat glasses that they all have ridiculous giant frames on the edge outside of their glasses because that's the only place where they can put the computer. There is an interesting technology that I've seen develop and I think could be applied to a glasses product in some way. Would be like they're on expensive luxury cars. There's this thing where you can have a sunroof on the top that at the push of a button can switch from being completely transparent to completely opaque. I don't know how possible this is, but that could be a different technology Apple could adopt on a glasses version of this product as well. Like when you want a brighter screen for your virtual reality apps, maybe like the outside of the glasses like become more opaque so that you don't have that light bleeding problem.
It sounds like the glasses in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which as soon as something bad happens, they black out. So you don't have to look at the scary things.
So you don't get scared.
I really think that as the Vision line of products develops, I mean, obviously the augmented reality glasses are the holy grail. They will be the first product in the line of products to have the potential to replace an iPhone because it becomes an invisible sort of like product in your life that obsoletes the need to have like a physical screen that you carry around with you. But I think there will always still be a place for the bigger, more powerful virtual reality headset that the Vision Pro sort of exists as a form factor in today. And the historical evidence for that is that even as technology advances and processing power increases to the point where you can shrink down products to be smaller, like the PowerBook comes along as the first time that you can shrink down a computer into a portable form factor. That doesn't necessarily obsolete the previous form factor as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the Apple Watch Series 10, for example, is more powerful than early versions of the iPhone, actually probably surprisingly recent versions of the iPhone. But, you know, we still have iPhones as well because we take the increase in computing power and invent new things that we can use it for, like Apple Intelligence. And so I think that even as the technology advances such that we can shrink and get the power of a Vision Pro in a much smaller, lighter device that we can use every day, well, just imagine how much more powerful the Vision Pro 5 will be then.
Yeah.
If it has all of those similar gains to it. I'm also reminded of a Bill Gates quote that I think about a lot. People overestimate what can happen in 5 years and underestimate what can happen in 10 years. I think that in 5 years, we'll have, you know, more advanced versions of the Vision Pro, probably a cheaper version. But I think it'll be 10 years before we have a good version of the glasses. And then we can have like a real, true lineup of Vision products that makes sense, that isn't confusing, that clickbaity YouTubers can shout at as being a failure.
And that's really interesting when you put it like that. That does make sense of Vision Pro being called Vision Pro. It's positioning it relative to something else that we haven't seen yet. And with that in mind, and as one thought that I wanted to use to close was when the Series 3 Apple Watch launched, it was the first one that had built-in LTE cellular data, and they had introduced GPS in the previous model. And Jeff Williams said when he announced it,
wait, can I be Jeff Williams? Because you're Tim Cook and Charlie is Johnny Ive.
Yeah, let Griffin be Jeff.
Oh, go on. Yeah, you be Jeff Williams.
So Jeff Williams says, "This has been our vision from the very beginning, and we believe built-in cellular makes Series 3 the ultimate expression of Apple Watch."
Now, I find that really interesting because what he's saying there, again, getting back into the Cupertinology, is this was what Apple Watch was always supposed to be. Even when they released the very first not very good Apple Watch, this was the Apple Watch they wanted to make. So if you take that logic and apply that to Vision Pro, it's really reasonable to suppose that there may well be obviously missing things, which they just couldn't put into this first one, but they wanted to release early and release often. But they have a direction they're going in. With Series 3, so that was like 3 years later, that they finally added all the bits that were the essential part of the picture from their perspective. So they shipped a product that was a minimum viable product, I suppose you could say. It had the essence of what they felt was necessary in order to ship something, but it was missing GPS and it was missing LTE, which was their vision from the very beginning. They just weren't able to do it. So, we don't know what their vision is for Vision Pro, but it's quite reasonable to suppose that they're operating on a similar model, that they've put something out there which is good enough to ship and has a lot of merit, which the original Apple Watch absolutely had, and for some users is going to deliver a huge amount of value. But there might be things that they consider essential which aren't even in there yet, but are going to be in there in a few years' time.
I don't think this is a category that's a platform. I think this is an accessory at best. I don't think that either the Vision Pro or AR glasses are going to replace phones or laptops. Phones haven't replaced laptops.
You think that they've invented a third product that they can sell to everybody?
I think that it's a third product that they're going to be able to sell to existing Mac or iPhone users, perhaps. I just don't see what is the use case for this over a phone. I mean, obviously, I understand that having the Windows in front of you is quite nice. And if the technology can be managed to have a cinema screen that is actually good enough to look at, and it's kind of nice.
I think you could say the same thing as an Apple II user. It's like, I can use VisiCalc on my Apple II. I mean, sure, the windows that you can move around on a Mac desktop are nice, but do I really need that? Isn't that the same kind of argument? It's like, no, you don't need it, but it's great.
The iMac or any PC today is essentially, the concept is the same as an Apple II. It's a screen with a keyboard and a controller. I think this is trying to be an entirely new computing paradigm. It's a different interface. You've got this thing floating in front of you, whereas you took the desktop, you shrunk it down into a laptop, you shrunk it down into a thing in your pocket that you touched. This is making it virtual in a way, but you have to wear glasses, which not everyone's going to want to wear. Even if you do wear glasses, you're going to have to want to wear Apple glasses.
I have one more metaphor that might settle this, in that for every technology product, and Apple understands this better than anybody else in the world, there's the think of it and there's the feel of it. The feeling of using a Vision Pro, it really does need to be experienced for you to really understand it. And I would say if you don't have a spare bank account to empty, then don't schedule an interactive demo at an Apple store.
Well, guys, we've been going on for a while now, so I think we should wrap it up there. Griffin, if people want to connect with you online, where they can obviously read all of your stuff on Cult of Mac and follow you on the Cultcast, wherever they get their podcasts, and how else can they connect with you online?
I'll plug a completely random, unrelated thing that I do online, a random side project of mine. If you're on Mastodon, you can also follow an account called Doctor Who minus context, or No Context Who at mastodon.social. It has random screenshots that I take from episodes of Doctor Who that look kind of silly.
I'm searching for that right now.
And Charlie, if people want to connect with you online, how can they do that?
You can find me also on Mastodon at mrcharlie@indieweb.social.
Fantastic. And I'm at Graham Bauer on Instagram and on Threads. And I'm at Graham Bauer at dulc.es. If you've enjoyed the episode and you're feeling very generous, please do give us a review and a star rating on Apple Podcasts. It really helps with our visibility. And until next time, bye-bye.
Good evening.
Bye.